All right, so I'd just like to welcome everyone to this May Day meeting of the Hunter Living Histories Showcase. I just want to pay my respects to the Awabakal people on whose land we're currently meeting today, and pay my respects to their elders, both past, present, and those yet to be. And I also want to pay my respects also to the lands, Aboriginal people on the lands of which you're currently zooming into us today. Wherever they may be, and pay our respects also to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And any Indigenous people and Aboriginal people that are joining us today, welcome, and we hope you enjoy this session. This is the first time our showcase has ever had a choir, and we really are excited about the Newcastle People's Chorus, which is a Hunter Valley-based social justice and union choir, and they are going to open our showcase with a song. Over to you.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. What we're going to do is just 3 songs, and we're going to do one called Bread and Roses, and another one is called Weevils in the Flower, which is dedicated to Vera Deacon, who was one of our most favourite followers. She came to all our parties, all our performances for many, many years, and she's been very dear to us over that period of time. And there is a journal up there, up the end, an independent journal, I might add, not a party political film, independent journal that's got a tribute to Vera in it as well. And for those interested in the Aboriginal issues, which I hope is everyone, there's also a collector's item in the form of the first pandemic image on the front cover of one of the other journals. There's only very few of them left, so they're very hard to get. And the third song is also, it's going to be a Newcastle song, because obviously the one about Vera is. It's called Makers of Iron and Steel. Okay, so we're going to start off with Bread and Roses. Okay.
Sorry.
As we are marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 millocks grey, are touched with all the radiance that the sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing bread and roses, bread and roses. As we come marching, we battle to for men, for they are in the struggle, and together we shall win. Our lives shall not be sweated, from breath until life closes. Our starve as well as body, give us bread, but give us roses. As we are marching, unnumbered women dead, go crying through our singing, their ancient cry for bread. Small art and love and beauty, their touching spirits new. Yes, it is bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we come marching, we bring the greater days, the
must be something about choir.
Is the rising of the
That might be the Union Choir.
and light, the tent that toil where one reposes, for the sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses.
Peter, conductor, who's as not normally our conductor, but our conductor's in Europe at the moment, and he's filling in for us and doing a terrific job. That song was written in 1915 about the textile workers' strikes in the east coast of the US, and it's relevant today as it was then. The next one we're going to do is the one dedicated to Vera. It's the Weevils in the Flower.
Oops.
On an island in a river, how that bitter river ran. I grew on scraps of charity in the best way that you can. On an island in a river where I grew to be a man. For dull bread is bitter bread, bitter bread and sour. There's grief in the taste of it, there's weevils in the flour. There's weevils in the flour. And just across the river stood the mighty BHP. It poured pollution on the water, oh, a land of misery. And its smoke was black as Hades, rolling hungry to the sea. For no bread is bitter bread, bitter bread and sour. There's grief in the taste of it, there's weevils in the flour. There's weevils in the flour. In those humpies by the river, we lived on dole and stew, while just across the water, those greedy smokestacks grew. And the hunger of the many filled the bellies of the few. For dull bread is bitter bread, bitter bread and sour. There's grief in the taste of it, there's weevils in the flour. There's weevils in the flour. On an island in a river, how that bitter river ran. It broke the banks of charity and baked the bread of man. On an island in a river where I grew to be a man. For dull bread is bitter bread, weevils in the flour. But we grew hard as time upon our black bread and sour. Our black bread and sour.
And it was about Vera's life on the island. Grew up across Mosquito Island, and all everything there is absolutely. And our dear Vera. Next is well, it's a local one from 1999. The closure of the steelworks. This one's written by Georgina Taranswini. So it's makers of iron and steel.
They did their best, they gave their dreams, that's why we stand on holy ground. Of iron and steel, we sing their song lives on, the work is gone, the work that made the iron and steel. They put their love into the metal that they made, it made us strong. In time of war, the women came. They worked when danger touched the shore. They joined the men of iron and steel. The furnace raged, soon to be cold, but not our hearts a cloud of steam. We'll leave the sky from borrowed trees to sacred trees and boileries. They were the makers of iron and steel. Sing as we go, tread softly on this ground, beneath our feet lies hopes and dreams, the very dreams that built the city we call home, the home that made the iron and steel. They did their best, they gave their dreams, that's why we stand on holy ground. Of iron and steel, we sing their song lives on, the work is gone, the work that made the iron and steel. Sing as we go, tread softly on this ground, beneath our feet lie hopes and dreams, the very dreams that built the city we call home, the home that made the iron and steel. Newcastle.
The inspiration for today, being May Day, was that we kept seeing the Newcastle Trades Hall come up over and over again in researches and stories about the formation of the University of Newcastle, the Aboriginal Advancement Committee. I started to think to myself with Kate Senior's work, with Dexter Daniels, and the soil that was being sort of transferred from the hands of Prime Minister Gough Whitlam into the hands of the Ngari. And I thought to myself, Newcastle's had a really interesting, progressive role to play in the history of Australia, and the Newcastle Trades Hall Council seems to have been at the centre of a lot of this. So I just wanted to have a bit of a light shone on this, so we contacted Rob Noble, who's been a historian and wrote that fantastic book here of human right and human grit. Gain, sorry, not human. Sorry. And there's some really, there's a fantastic couple of paragraphs in there where, now I don't know what it was about the Japanese shelling of Newcastle in June of 1942, but it seemed to have awoken something in the community. And even though that there had been a push for the university, that bombing seemed to have woken everyone up to revivify this push. So Rod, tell us the story of how working class people, their role in actually the creation of the university and the library that we're in.
Yeah, to you, sure, Rob. Okay. Well, the first thing is that we're celebrating the Hunter Workers, as it's now, that's the brand name. The actual registered name is still Newcastle Trades Hall Council. We're celebrating 154th year of existence, the oldest peak labour organisation in the whole of Australia. So we've got it right here with us in Newcastle in the Hunter Valley. I'm not going to go through 154 years of history. As John has mentioned, I'm going to focus more on the later parts, and particularly how the university was and what role the unions played in the formation of the university. Just a brief sort of backtrack on that 154 years. The first 30 years of it can be classified as being around about trying to obtain the 8-hour day. And that's why the 8-hour committee is the forerunner to the Newcastle Trades Council, and why there's a continuum. And in 1869, that was the major thing already, that as you probably know from history, the stonemasons and others have been pushing for that. And the makeup of the early union movement was particularly craft-based. So there was stonemasons, plasterers, painters, and all sorts of carpenters and so on. They all had their little craft unions, and it wasn't really, and it was relatively conservative in those periods. Those people wanted to have the respect. They were after respect in society. And it wasn't until the industrial unions came along, in particular for us, the coal miners union, in the Hunter Valley here. It wasn't until then that there was more of a radicalism began. And to give you some idea, when the coal miners union started to form and it became important. It wasn't until 1915, of course, that the iron workers or the steel workers became, because there was no steel workers until 1915. But prior to that, the big union, industrial union, was the miners. And at times when there was 40 or 50 members of craft unions in around Newcastle, of each of the craft unions, there were thousands of members of the miners union. It was the dominant union. And there were various attempts to try and form separate peak organisations as apart from the Hunter from the 80-hour committee, but they didn't get off the ground, because if the miners didn't support it, it wasn't going to go ahead, basically. And when you got those sort of numbers, it was quite clear. You could have a lot of little craft unions, but when the big ones said no, we don't like that, and that was hard to get off the ground. So there were some false starts to trades and labour councils over the years. And then into the 1900s, now just done a giant leap there, 30 or 40 years, but into the 1900s there was, there was one very important thing I forgot. We've had two military occupations in the Hunter Valley because of strikes by the miners. 1879 and 1888. The regiment, the then regiment, military regiments came and occupied Newcastle for in 1879 for about 95 days. What's that? Well over 3 months we were occupied because of the miners were on a big strike. And again in 1888, so 1879 and 1888. So there was a bit of militancy going around then. You had one big demonstration against the military occupation and against the coal owners who were, they were the reason for the strike. Let's put it that way. And there was 6,000. This was a time when there's only 30 or 40,000 people in Newcastle. There was some 6,000 people turned up at a demonstration. Now, if you looked at that in proportional terms today, there'd be 30 or 40,000 people turning up at a demonstration here in Newcastle at this moment. So to give the equivalent numbers, so it was massive community support for the miners at that time. And everywhere, the women were all out with tin kettling. And when they were bringing the scabs in, they were tin kettling them and singing fairly rude songs, to say the least. And so anyway, we haven't been able to learn any of the songs that they were singing, but we probably wouldn't be able to perform them either. So, anyway, so okay, back to the 1900s. I'm going to come up pretty soon to the issue of the union's involvement with this university. Okay, there was a militancy. So I mentioned that the craft unions were relatively conservative, and that's probably true. And but the industrial unions certainly weren't. And then there was a bit of vying going on, and in 1917, those of you that know the history, Billy Hughes, the notorious Billy Hughes, brought in conscription, and well, tried to, but there was big movement against it, and the unions split. Some of the more conservative ones went one way, and the more radical ones went the other way to fight conscription, and because there were referendums, of course, and not only did that happen in 1917, it began to radicalise the whole population, but there was a revolution. And where was that revolution?
Yes.
It was in Russia. It was in Russia, 1917. And up to that point, the IWW, the International Workers of the World, which was the kind of more radical union movements, had two strands, the Chicago strand and probably some of you know all this history anyway, but I mean, there was a Detroit strand as well. The Detroit strand wanted one big union with a political party leading it. The other strand, which became known as the Wobblies, wanted just the one big union, and when that became big and everyone joined together in one big union, that would be the end of capitalism. And that was, and they were gathering people around. This is what we've got to do. And all of a sudden, there was a revolution in Russia, and that pipped everyone at the post. And there was a Communist Party formed, needless to say, and that's pretty relevant to what actually what transpired from that point on, because all the IWW people, not all of them, but most, joined the then fledgling Communist Party, which struggled to even be in existence for the first 10 years because of the economic recession and all that sort of stuff. So that's the overall picture. I'll just make sure I haven't left anything out of that. Yes, I think I've got it all that I wanted to say, except for poor old Peter Bowling from the miners who got carted away down in Hunter Street there in chains and jailed for a year or two. Okay, yeah, that's the main stuff. My plan now. Okay. Right. The developing militancy from 1917. There was, during that period, leading up to the 1930s, the Communist Party, which had just been formed in 1920, gradually, but it was fledgling, it gradually became slightly more powerful. The Labour Party was, with the Lang forces and all that, was getting more split. And the unions were splitting along with it. Some were going this way, some going that way. Some were starting to support the Communist Party, some was supporting Lang Labor, some supporting the other Labor Party. And there were about three Labor parties at that stage. There was Federal Labor, State Labor, and Lang Labor. And during all this period, it was just becoming gradually, the militant groups started to become more powerful. And by 1943, a very important period, a very important date, up until that, they were already at the Trades Hall Councils, because it was formed by then, quite solidly in 1926, there were already discussions about the need for a university in the region. And there was even talk of land being available near the abattoir. And no one knew exactly what they meant, because the nickname for the BHP was the abattoir. And but there was actually a little abattoir somewhere, if those you remember.
Warrabrook.
Yeah, what's now Warrabrook. Yeah. And so they didn't know whether, which one it would refer to, probably both really. Anyway, the militancy developed to such a point where the existing Trades Hall secretary, who was from the Lang side of things, was deposed in 1943, and that was a very important year. And from that moment on, the issue of in 1942-43 leading up to it, one of the key figures in all this is Ross Marnes. And Ross Marnes, or how you pronounce it, EARNS, I would say Marnes, but anyway, Marnes, who cares? Yeah. He was the headmaster of the high school, then the boys' high school, which is now at Waratah, I think. Yeah, Waratah. Yeah, so
In town before that, wasn't it?
yeah,
Up on the hill.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's
it's
right.
now
Well,
the Newcastle East Public School.
He was the headmaster. If you go to Waratah High now,
Mm.
Waratah High School, you'll see a photo of him up in their hallway when you first come into the office there. He's up there on a great big photo here. Just a second.
I think they call it Callaghan Campus now.
What do they
They
call it?
do.
Call it Callaghan Campus.
It's now become Callaghan,
Callaghan
Okay.
Campus.
not Waratah.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, he's important because he spoke at a PNC meeting in 1942, and there's a lot of people interested in about the issue of the university, and he stimulated people to form a university committee. It was called then, basically, and some of the more militant unions. Henry Scanlon, who was the president of the miners' union in those days, and Charlie Morgan was from the Ironworkers Union. They were two of the big industrial unions. They were the first to join this university committee. Now that's a pretty significant issue. The two biggest and most militant unions were the first to join the university committee. And it was a bit quiet, not so going anywhere until the change in 1943 that I just alluded to. And then at that point, the Communist Party, along with its ALP left allies, took over the Newcastle Trades Hall Council and became the leadership. And they held the leadership for about 70 years after that, from that point on. But so that then things started to move, and there was now I've got a few quotes here. Just find the quotes which I have got. Right, just bear with me. Right, here we go. Okay. We're up to Ross Marnes and the boys by PNC. Marnes was a lot of people don't know, but he was an NTHC. He was a Newcastle Trades Hall Council delegate, which is pretty unusual for a headmaster to be a union delegate. And the result of that meeting, that PNC meeting in 1940, in July 42, a number of city organisations were approached, and in August 42, Marnes addressed the THC about the university committee, and the Trades Hall Council was one of the first organisations to be involved in that committee. I mentioned that the two people in particular, and they represented the Newcastle Trades Hall Council, and one of the problems was that they wanted a university. The Trades Hall Council wanted a university attached to, but not controlled by the Sydney University. Now here we come to what was one of the problems. And the fact is that the Sydney University Senate had a right to decide where any universities were set up in the colony. Sorry, what was the colony? The New South Wales colony still like then, but they had the right. And they decided that, yes, we'll set one up in Canberra and we'll set one up in Armidale, but not in Newcastle. And now that rile our mob here up quite significantly. And Marnes was addressing the Trades Hall Council continually about this over the years, over 42, 43, 44. He said that universities in Australia were not democratic, and that's why unions are not represented on their councils. Okay, and he praised Henry Scanlon for the work on the committee and urged unions to raise money to ensure that they would be represented when the University Council is established. very optimistic language back in, given the amount of time that was still to pass before it was set up. And Morgan, who I mentioned, Secretary of the Ironworkers, noted that the system of higher education in Australia was such that only the children of affluent parents could take advantage of it. And this is very important and needs following up. Morgan urged all unions to contribute to a library fund for the Newcastle University Committee. And the Trades Hall Council carried a motion along those lines, and the first large donation for the library, the University Library, came from the Ironworkers Union, and the Trades Hall and other unions all contributed as well. I would like to know where that money went, because this is a long time before the university was set up.
That's right.
Yeah. Anyway, they were already putting money into, we need a university for our sons and daughters. We must have, one here, not just whether Sydney says there should be one or not. And later, Morgan, by the way, later in the 1960s, Morgan became the Secretary of the University Establishment Committee, and would have been there at the time that it was actually established. So Charlie Morgan went right the way through. So that's another important direct link between the unions and the establishment of the university.
Well, you should read what Professor Ashby said.
Yes,
that'll really upset
okay.
him. Come on.
All right, okay. Where did I've got that written down here. Here we go.
There it is. It's the 2 paragraphs. That's
I
right.
wrote that.
That's the most important 2 paragraphs.
Okay.
That not
Marnes, again, our delegate, total delegate, quoted Ashby from Sydney University as saying that it was stupid to assert that a university education is the right of all. He went on to say that the extension of he must have been an idiot.
It's Morrison, he's
that the extension of university education would lower the standard of Sydney University to mediocrity. And this is when Marnes pointed out there was no cry of mediocrity when university colleges were announced in Canberra and Armidale, only when it was proposed for a community of working class people in Newcastle. Yeah. So anyway, that's anyway, by the 1944, the a university college affiliated to Sydney University had turned into a call for a full university in its own right, serving from the Hawkesbury to Taree. And again, it was Mearns that moved in the Trades Hall that the New South Wales state government should amend the University Act to enable the establishment of the University of Newcastle without requiring the consent of the Sydney University Senate. And he noted that, that's where that quote was here. Okay, so this kept getting raised in the Trades Hall in 1948, 49, 52, continually on through the 1950s, and it became the whole role of the Trades Hall became pivotal in that in the establishment committee because of one person in particular, and that's to Alex Dowling, the Secretary of Newcastle Trades Hall Council from 1947 to 1969. Alex was a highly respected and tough negotiator. I knew him quite well. A very experienced and capable advocate with a broad knowledge of a whole range of issues and the subjects, and a very good speaker. He was considered the de facto leader of many of the delegations to Sydney on the issue of the university, along with community education department reps and local politicians. They all looked to Alex to be the first speaker when they got down there to, try and get the university established. Alex was the leading, and there's an Alex Dowling prize still open for the history department. Actually, a very small amount of money now compared to what it was when it was started. But anyway, so it's still one there. for anyone studying labour history, that was what it was for. Okay, so yeah, so you had the community reps, you had education department reps, local politicians and trade unions represented on that establishment committee, and led mostly with the delegations by Alex Dowling whenever they went to Sydney. So anyone that wants to sort of say that there was how was the University of Newcastle established? Who was behind it? Who was pushing it? Who was fighting for it for decades and decades and decades? And finally, in getting it, then you cannot deny that the trades hall and the trade unions, which if you were at the May Day March yesterday, it's one of the biggest May Day marches I've ever seen. I've been a delegate there for 45 years continuous. It's the biggest May Day march that I can remember. I think, and the pipe band led down the streets. There were a couple of there was thousands. There was a huge number of people. So okay, that's now leading on to the issue of the Aboriginal Advancement Committee. There's a few little things that I felt I had to mention. The Aboriginal Advancement Committee in chronology comes before the other two. One is the anti-Vietnam War and the anti-war and anti-nuclear movements that the Trades Hall were involved in, very important, and East Timor, very important. But first of all and foremost, the Aboriginal Advancement Committee. Now, I wanted to read something from the Workers' Weekly, very briefly, from 1931, and because I've told you about the more radical movements and the formation of the Communist Party, and it becomes very important in this respect. And in the common term, which was the Communist International, of which the Australian Communist Party was associated with or attached to, in 1931, that's the Workers' Weekly, that was the Communist Party's newspaper at the time, that said, made demands stemming from the Communist International. And this becomes very important for the whole of the Aboriginal issue. They demanded full and equal rights for all Aboriginal people and with white races, political freedom for Aboriginals, removal of all colour restrictions, cancellation of all licences to employ Aboriginals without pay, prohibition of slave and forced labour, unconditional release from jail of all Aboriginals and no further arrests until Aboriginal juries can hear and decide cases, abolition of Aboriginal Protection Board, the APB, which the Communist Party classes capitalism slave recruiting agencies and terror organisations against Aboriginals, prohibition of the kidnapping of Aboriginal children, liquidation of all missions and so-called homes for Aboriginals, and handover to Aboriginals large tracts of land.
Amazing.
1931. Now that's
nearly 100 years ago, and we're still fighting it.
Well, I mean, that's important because when the Communist Party, along with the ALP, left, got control of Trades Hall in 1943, it wasn't long. Well, after the war, wasn't long before in the 1950s that the Trades Hall set up the Aboriginal Advancement Committee. And it was certainly a big issue at Trades Hall Council meetings in the 1950s. And in 1960, the Aboriginal Advancement Committee was set up in August 1960. And the first well, because the subcommittees of Trades Hall had to always have, under the Constitution, they had to have a Trades Hall executive member as being the president and the chair of it. But the first secretary was Barbara Curthoys, 1960, set up the, the first president was Tom Hoare, who's from the, Barbara, by the way, was representing the international, either the Union of Australian Women or International Women's State Committee or one of those. She was representing on the Advancement Committee. And Tom Hoare was from the Amalgamated Engineering in AEU. he was the executive member for Trades Hall, and he was on that committee. So so from that point on, I'm going to dovetail here. That was it's understandable when you hear that was what the Communist Party people were advocating and fighting for back in the 1930s. I knew some of the old comrades, George Mulholland being one of them, who told me that he was active around in the 1930s around the Aboriginal issues and fighting for Aboriginal rights. And George's another amazing story in his own right. And anyway, that's another story. But he did confirm that they were active around this in the 1930s, but it's only when they got control of the Trades Hall Council that things really started to happen. And by the Aboriginal Advancement Committee was set up in 1960, and you've got Jean Bailey. There's photos in the exhibition that I put on of Jean Bailey carrying the Aboriginal Advancement Committee banner down Hunter Street. So, well, that's a bit of a rough outline of the involvement of the trade unions mainly in the university, but also a bit about the Aboriginal advancement.
Can I ask whose idea was it to, I presume the university was TAFE, the one at Islington, is it? It's
the TAFE College.
Yeah, the TAFE College. So whose idea was it to put it there on that particular block of land? Or
well, that's a very good question. Let's find out. I'm sorry, I can't.
I went past it today in the bus, had a good look. Because it's still being used, of course.
Yeah. It'd be good to know. Yeah. Why? But I can imagine it'll be that was only this land here wasn't available. You know? Yeah. So they had to set it up somewhere. And there was already a building there, and rooms and things to meet in.
The first stage was a university college, which was established in Newcastle University College in 1951. And then when that happened, then they started the push for autonomy, and then choice of the land over here, I think, was announced in 1962. And there were Aboriginal people living on this land, which is recently, guys in the GlamX lab have digitised a minute footage of these people, and you can see that on the Hunter Living History. So we're trying to ascertain their identities. But I mean, another part of this was that Dr. Ray Kelly donated a whole sheath of papers from Stan Masterson, who was the chair of the Aboriginal Advancement Committee, and so they're all sitting downstairs, and we're going through them as well. And he was going to be one of our speakers today, but Kate and Rod are going to look after his bit in the middle of all this while doing it.
If it's important, it's just well to know too that Stan Masterson was in the Communist Party. Probably no surprises there.
Okay, over to you, Kate.
Hi everyone. I'd like to add my acknowledgement of the Worimi Kawarrapul people, but also to the Gurindji people, the Larrakia people, and the 7 different tribes of Nukur, who really are the main characters in this story today. So thanks to them, particularly the Nukur people who are the descendants of Dexter Daniels. So I decided to I was working through the Copley archives and what I've started on the Masterton archives. It's a very rich treasure trove of material indeed. And decided to sort of situate my story between 2 quite pivotal May Day marches, a 1964 one in Darwin and a 1971 one, which sounds crazy, in Sydney. That sort of encapsulate this intense movement towards the acknowledgement of Indigenous peoples' workers' rights, and the move towards, acknowledging Aboriginal land rights as well. It's a very intense period from about 1964 onwards. The main character in this story is this man here, Dexter Daniels. He's important for me because he's from Nukur, and I worked in Nukur for the last 25 years.
Excuse me, what is that?
Was that?
What is that word?
Nuko. It's a Aboriginal community in the Northern Territory. Teeny tiny little community. Punches well above its weight in terms of very important people though. And he's from Nuko, and he was a union organiser for the North Australian Workers Union. We didn't know much about his story until we found him in the Copley archives. I knew about him because he's my best friend Daphne's uncle. So I had actually, the first thing I ever done in Nuko was went to his funeral, but nobody told me who he was because you can't talk about dead people. So nobody said, this was Uncle Dexter, he did amazing things. Said, oh, it's Uncle, and he's, we're going to his funeral. So I never knew very much about him when I was living there. So this is Dexter.
Can I ask geographically where it is?
I should be able to show you a map in a little bit, but if you go to Darwin, drive down to Catherine, keep going a little bit to Mataranka, and then head out to the Gulf of Carpentaria, you'll cross the Roper River, and then you'll get to Nuko. It's about 117 kilometres from the coast. So it is classified as a very, very remote community. 1,000 people live there right now. Yeah. So it's a quite big community for by Northern Territory standards, actually. So on May Day, on this day in 1964, 400 workers organised by the North Australian Workers Union really made history by walking out for the first time on May Day, as it says, as fellow workers. So it was really acknowledging the fact that Aboriginal people were workers too. And that's really, really important because the background is this. In 1964, Aboriginal stockmen, if they were paid, were earning probably about a fifth of what non-Aboriginal stockmen were doing. They had gone to the Commonwealth Conciliation Arbitration Committee and they had been granted equal wages in 1964, but they were backdated until 1968. And this was really the reason why people were actually walking out on the street saying, this is not fair. So it was delayed until December 1968. Now, Dexter comes from a very activist family. His brother Davis said the justice of this decision can never be explained to Aboriginal people. Dexter is more direct. He said, just want to fight. Just why don't you let my people fight? This is important enough to go on the line for. This is what's going to bring us together. This is the big thing. So this is what was drawing people out on the streets. We want to be acknowledged for the work that we do. So in 1964, Dexter was a orderly at the Royal Darwin Hospital, and when he was also an organiser for the North Australia Workers Union, and this equal pay for stockmen became very high on his agenda. He started visiting stations down the track, and when you think about this, this is a huge undertaking. Newcastle Waters today takes 2 days to drive to. Then would have been a dirt road. It was a huge, huge drive down to Newcastle Waters to go and organise people. So in 1966, he was down in Newcastle Waters talking to the stockmen, talking to the lead stockman, and convinced the people at Newcastle Waters to go on strike, which they did. This is the first strike. And then Dexter meets Vincent Lingari in Royal Darwin Hospital and says, old man, it's time that you lot went on strike too. And so Lingari goes back to Gurindji country, to Wave, and sure enough, they sit down. And Dexter organises for food and trucks and everything else to come down and support that strike action. He's the first Aboriginal executive of the Darwin branch of the ALP, and later, much later, well, not much later, but in this series, he organised another strike in his own community of Nuko, which was then called the Roper River Mission. So he organised a strike in 1970 there as well. So he is not only amazing in the sense that he was going to all these places down the track really hard. You know, I organise people to come from Nuko to here. And even with mobile phones and rapid transport, it is a nightmare sometimes. Now, his nieces come down and seen the records that we found. But it's really difficult to organise people who live so remotely. It's really hard to get in touch. Mobile phone is patchy, computer access is patchy, transport is really, really difficult. He was doing it in the 60s. It's amazing. So in 1966, he organises the Newcastle Water Station strike with this man who's called Captain Major. And at this point, he's starting to capture national attention. And he's doing that because he's starting to engage with the Southern unions who are taking up this cause. So suddenly, this is not just something that's confined to the Northern Territory. This is something that people are talking about in the Southern capitals. And Newcastle here becomes a really important part of that story. So this was the first strike in 1966. In 1966, they marched in front of the Legislative Assembly. I think that man at the front is Frank Hardy carrying the banner. So Frank Hardy, who wrote The Unfortunate Australians. The thing about Dexter is that he was an amazing networker. And so he was very good at linking up with people who were going to help him tell his story. And Frank, he identified very quickly as somebody who was a really good storyteller. So Frank became very important to this. He was giving, at this protest, Dexter gives the Mr. Chan the pamphlet heading out the demands of Aboriginal people in the Territory, which is full pay for Aboriginal stockmen, direct payment of social services to Aborigines, which is really important because all social services at that time were paid either to the landholder, so the station manager. So if you're on a big cattle station, they'd be paid to the station manager and he'd dole them out, or they'd go to the missionaries and the missionaries would dole out as they saw it appropriately. So people didn't even have control of their own money. So that's a really important demand. And they wanted full ownership of the Aboriginal reserves. So places like Nuko are sitting in Arnhem Land, and they were saying, right, this is an Aboriginal reserve and we want ownership of this land. And what, as I said, Dexter is an advocate. I mean, he's a networker and he is working with the unions to get his cause known. And he said, the union response to him was that unionists everywhere must rally behind the North Australia Workers' Union and other people seeking justice for the Aborigines of the Northern Territory, equal pay for equal work. And so, we start to see through the archives and through the newspapers, the fact that unionists are really engaging with this material.
No, but it's all it's only it's all
Doug, would you mind putting yourself on mute, please? Could see he's disconnected. Okay.
That's all right. So his Dexter starting on his speaking tour. So this one was sponsored by Actors Equity, and he's talking to dock workers in Sydney at this point. And he says, I am just like you. I feel the same and I want to live the same. I'm going to fight for the rights and equality of my people so they can live the same. And I'm going to do it with people like Captain Major. In this case, he was down south with Captain Major from Newcastle Waters, people of my own colour, but we need the help of people like you. So he was really asking for people to engage with the plight of Aboriginal people. And they did in ways that we've never seen before in many cases. Continues with speaking tours to raise funds for the striking Aboriginal stockmen. And he spoke to the Newcastle Trades Hall on October the 26th. And he said, we've got a problem. We've got a hard problem. We've got a fight on our hands, and we need the support of the Southern trade unions. And again, you know, now he's sponsored by Equity, Building Working Industrial Union, Teachers Federation, Society for Advancement of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. You see, you know, people passing around the hat for the striking stockmen in the pictures there as well. Then we come to the Wave Hill walk-off in 1966. Massive cattle station owned by Lord Vestey, who I think was about the third richest person in England at that time. This cattle station was designed to for an export market, so cattle were raised and the beef was sent back to England. And it only survived because it had a huge number of Aboriginal workers, because it would have been too expensive to run otherwise. It only could run if you didn't pay the workers. No, that's the only way that this could be financially viable. Farming in the Northern Territory is really tough, and it doesn't yield great dividends because it's really hard conditions. So, you know, and so in terms of economy, what do? Oh, you just don't pay your workers. That's easy peasy. So the Gurindji people, you know, helped by Dexter, led by Vincent Lingari, supported by the Southern trade unions, walked off at Wave Hill in 1966. They wanted their pay increased to $50 a week. And they walked off and they stayed off, and they continued to be supported by the unions. And, you know, repeated trips by Dexter and Vincent Ngari down to the south, talking to people, raising money, raising awareness, going back to Wave Hill, making sure that food and support is available for people who are striking, sitting in the river.
It went on for 8 years, I understand.
It went on for 8 years. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've been to Wattie Creek. It is not the most hospitable place to actually camp for a very, very long time. It's a tough environment. It's very, very hot in summer, incredibly cold in winter. So it's hard. It's a desert. 1968, he's back down here, Newcastle Trades Hall Council, and raising awareness of the Gurindji struggle. I mean, I find it just so exciting to go through these records and find things like this stuff on Newcastle Trades Hall Council letterhead. Think, wow, yeah, we're running to Dexter. It's incredible. And this is all through, this starts to come through the Stan Masterson collection from the Aboriginal Advancement Committee. This is from his records here. So, you know, they we're talking about the Gurindji struggle, that have film nights about the Gurindji struggle, that have dinners to raise fund for the Gurindji. That, you know, it was a constant effort to make people aware of the plight of Gurindji people, but also to make sure that funds kept on coming to support the strike action. In 1968, Australian government decided not to grant land at Wattie Creek. There was a moment where it looked like they might, but they didn't, to the Gurindji people. And Union ramped up its response. Said all forms of protest, including meetings and letters to Parliament, are needed. Funds are urgently required to feed Gurindjis at Wattie Creek. 1969, there was the Aboriginal Advancement Committee supported a 24-hour vigil on the post office steps in support of land rights. So, you know, keeping up the pressure on the Australian government to grant land. Also a boycott of Vestey's products. So the unions and the students put out quite extensive lists of things that Vestey's made, from powdered milk to canned beef to whatever it was, some textiles, and made sure that everybody had a list of things that they should not buy. And they started to protest outside places that sold Vestey's products as well. So there were big protests, you know, held in Sydney, held at major supermarkets, held at major shopping centres, to really get people aware of the fact that, you know, this company was continuing to rob Aboriginal people of their land. And in 1971, Dexter returns to Nuku and leads his own people out on a strike. So 400 people in Nuku, including kids, they left school, everybody just left and withdrew their labour. And the importance of land here now becomes absolutely paramount. What we want is the right to fully control our own land with no one to tell us what to do about it. And it's Dexter again here in Newcastle addressing the Trades Hall and seeking support for his own people to go on strike. He's led everybody else out on strike, but now Nuku itself has gone out on strike. Interestingly, in 1971, Nuku was granted the Yugal cattle lease, 1.5 million acres at Roper River. So it was made its first recommendation for the granting of a pastoral lease to an Aboriginal cattle company to people from Nuku. As a result of all this action, Nuku people, through a pastoral lease, actually managed to get their land back, which was quite incredible. And here's my my own bookend May Day picture in 1971. Here we are, support for the Gurindji. The resolution to the Gurindji problem is still way off into the future now. You know, it's not till 1976. But in 1971, you know, in those few short years, there is a groundswell of attention, awareness, you know, real sort of involvement in Aboriginal land rights from the Southern unions, from students. It was all made possible by, you know, people like Dexter coming and talking with the unions taking up this cause and really being involved with it, sorting and supporting it. You know, the change from 400 workers in Darwin to 4,000 people in Sydney supporting Gurindji and talking about the need to give their land back, you know, is a big and significant change from 1964 to 1971. And that is really is really the power of the unions and their dedication to Aboriginal rights. It's really important here. And then when it all died down, Dexter went and lived with the Gurindji people, stayed on at Wave Hill and stayed on to support Vincent Mangari in his quest to build this place for his people. And then poor old Dexter died in relative obscurity. No, died in total obscurity, actually. He eventually went back to the TV Islands, remarried, and then got quite sick, got dementia, was put into a nursing home in Catherine, and died at a very young age of 59. And nobody in his community remembered what he'd done. It's really, really sad. And so the other side to this story is that people in Nuku and his family are now learning about what their Uncle Dexter did. It's really, really powerful. There's his niece is an artist called Karen Rogers. She's putting in a painting of Dexter actually leading that procession, that May Day procession, into the Telstra Art Award this year. So it's amazing that you go from knowing nothing about somebody to it becoming a really important part of people's lives. And we're indebted to Merv and Janet and Stan for letting us do that, because none of us knew this stuff before. So I'm, deeply indebted to the library for preserving this material. Thank you.
That's the magic of archives and what can be in these things if people bother to record this stuff. But also Barbara Kurtzball as well, the papers of Barbara downstairs that were donated by her daughter Anne. And there's all these sort of stories intertwined. So thank you very much for I just love Newcastle. I love the way that Newcastle people can interact with these sorts of things and bring these lives back to life. for everyone. So thank you very much. Right.
Can I draw, John, could I draw attention of people to those two journals down there?
Yeah.
Because they're both, one of them, the one that there's most of, is got the tribute to Vera Deakin in it, and they're free, so just take them. They're free, and there's another one with the collector's item.
There you
The
go.
first pan.
There you go. See at the top there. There you go. There's that one.
The first pandemic
Yeah.
image, which was by a well-known Central Australian artist called Chips McAnulty, and yeah, they're free, just take them. And then the first pandemic, of course, there's no guessing what that refers to, but I mean it's a collector's item, and I think that's the last of them that are available that are left. They're back copies, you know, they're spares, they're surplus. You know.
So you're welcoming people to say,
Well, yeah,
mate.
take them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, servers. All right, any questions? We've got a couple of minutes for questions if anyone has any questions of our speakers. If
Just
not,
a comment.
comment.
A comment that was interesting about the bombing of Newcastle, because when the Pachabolka ran aground in 2007, it was a Japanese-built ship, and it ran aground on the 6th of June 2007. Did you all know that?
Maybe it will become the Eyes of Newcastle.
I've got a wonderful photo of it.
Don't do anything on the 6th of June. All right. Any other impressions? Okay, well, thank you very much, guys, for doing that.
Thank you, John and Anne. Yeah.
Very, very, okay. Now, we've had some big news from Miss Porter's house. Annabelle, would you like to share that with us?
Sure, thanks very much. We were, as you can see, we were successful in being inscribed on the UNESCO Australian Memory of the World Committee Register for Documentary Heritage. That happened on the 14th of April, and the story is one that began, well, in 1997 when Hazel Porter left the house and its contents to the National Trust. It's the only National Trust property in Newcastle, and 2,000 of the 5,000 objects are documents. When we had the significance assessment done by Rosalind Russell in 2021, we were all aware that the house and its contents was pretty special, but we didn't recognise perhaps just how special it is. And the documentary heritage in particular is of great significance because it's the documentary history of women and Newcastle living ordinary lives. And it's also about the completeness of the collection. So it includes things like the notebooks where they kept records of how much it cost to have their little dog Cooey from the day he was purchased until the day he died. They kept records of when they changed the light bulbs to sort of record how long a light bulb might last. There were records of the purchase of the funeral clothing that Florence made for upon the death of her husband Herbert in 1919 as a result of the pandemic. There's postcards, there's celluloid postcards. There are all sorts of wonderful documents that have been preserved, and I think I must acknowledge the work of many volunteers over many years to make sure that what would possibly have been seen as just ordinary shopping lists, but recognising in 1997 and beyond their importance to Newcastle and to Australia. So the inscription is a very special recognition of that work, and it's certainly something that I think will encourage people to look at some of the more research opportunities associated with Miss Porter's, and particularly the stories of women throughout the 19th century, the 20th century. So we've got a little video that will just show you, for those who haven't been to Miss Porter's, what it's like. And Anne's just been showing you some of the sorts of examples of things that are documents that have been listed with UNESCO. We had the videos done because of the access to the house is really limited. So one of the things we're trying to do is increase access. So we've also done some QR codes and things. So hence the virtual tour.
What year was the house built?
1909, 1910. And it was always lived by the one family. And so when you walk through it, it's from each room, the first, like the dining room is Edwardian, the front room is Art Deco, because they were good at keeping things. As you can see by 2,000 documents.
Thanks. Annabelle, how many National Trust properties have been put on the UNESCO Memory of the World?
For documentary heritage, we're the only one. The UNESCO listing of the trust in New South Wales is Old Government House. But there were 10 inscriptions made in April. Some of the other things that are inscribed on the Documentary Heritage Register are journals associated with the First Fleet, Captain Bligh, Mabo. So there are the sorts of things that you would expect to some of those documents. You wouldn't really expect some of the scrapbooks and things from a nice family of middle-class women in Newcastle, but it's just because it's so complete, unique, and so emotive of the time, because it was a tough century. The family lived there, as I say, since when Florence and Herbert first moved in upon their marriage, and then he died 9 years later. And so Florence and the two girls lived there all their lives. And they were both worked, both Ella and Hazel, but they were very good at making and mending, and they had to live through both the wars, the Depression, and obviously the influenza pandemic. So it's just, you can see the picture of their lives from the clothing they made, the stencils they used, the documents they kept records of. We've got in the bathroom, when we have school tours, we always make sure we open the cupboard so the school children can see the false teeth.
False teeth.
Everything's there.
It's quite an achievement. So congratulations to you and all the team.
Thank you. And if I could just say thank you also, Johnny, for was involved in letters of support and things. So thanks to the university too for their support.
Right, happy to talk. Okay, so we're now into the closing stages of the meeting. So we've got some updates and
Just brief updates, I guess, from the Kalana Lab. We've got all our volunteers back after the recess break. This week we've got 2 students, we've got Bertie, we've got Matthew down the end here with his dog called History.
yeah.
This
is the first showcase with a dog. His name is History. So it's making history. History is making history today.
Just want to shout out to Ron Barber. I'm just out of screen here, Ron. Know how you going?
So Verity and Matthew are here for a couple of weeks. We're spending 2 days in special collections this week, so we'll continue those. Davina, do you want to just take a seat here, just so people can see it? Our colleague Davina, who's library officer in special collections. We often get queries and inquiries come through, and we sometimes rack our brain. This inquiries come through recently, so I suggested Davina to come along to the meeting, see if anyone has heard of. Do you want to sort of say something about it?
Yes, so Vesta Private Hospital in Islington. Anyone have any ideas? Apparently 1942 was kind of like the main operation time. Someone was trying to find some information.
So we've sort of exhausted as
Was it a
much as
maternity
we look through, but if anyone who's zooming in knows of Sylvester's private
looked
hospital.
in Trove, there was a few births in 1942, so I know it existed. That's about all I have.
My parents were living at that time.
Have you tried asking Newcastle Library about, you know, how they can do a look at all the rates that were paid for certain properties?
Yeah.
They might be able to trace back.
Yeah, yep, I could certainly reach out to them. I know them quite well, so.
We're thinking along the lines that since it was a private hospital, the papers are probably still in private hands. So if anyone, I mean, they're called Sylvester's, so we would assume that it's someone.
If it was a
connected to
private
Sylvester.
hospital, it probably had a lot of children born there,
Yeah.
and some of those would still be alive around here.
Is there register of midwives and things like that? They often give where they're the private hospitals.
At that time, most births were at private hospitals.
Yeah. The problem is where the records end up. So the public hospitals are bad enough, but private hospitals where so anyway, it's
Excuse me, Johnny.
Yep.
At Judge Mullane, who lives in Bruce Street, Cooks Hill, lives in one of those original private hospitals, and whether he's got records and that, I don't know.
Oh, thank you, Ron. There might be something in the roof.
Yeah, could be.
You could ask on Lost Newcastle if anyone was born there. You know, Lost Newcastle on Facebook. Often, you know, you pull out memories from people there. So that's worth a try as well.
All right, well, if anyone comes up with anything, let Davina know, and then she can fulfil the inquiry. Okay, John Whitty has an update.
John Whitty does, he's soon
And what is it? And I'm just going to read something out. There's been a few developments with the Hunter Rainbow History Group. There was an article in Q News, again, online newspaper, in March, which was sort of advertising the new Little Richard movie, which was called Little Richard Finding God. And of course, they got the date wrong for him touring Australia. They said 1962, and we know it was 1957. So I emailed the journalist, and it's all been fixed up. I sent them the documentation from Living Histories. They were very appreciative. The other thing is that it's Little Richard, I'm Everything. It's an insight into his Christian beliefs and trying to marry them with his homosexual identity, and that was I think it was obviously the reason for those conversions back to Christianity and then lapsing again. Now, the remarkable Sister Annie Laurie, the ABC did an article. Giselle Wakatama from ABC Newcastle did an article for the ABC, and Living Histories, our site, provided research for the ABC in terms of an oral history interview and photos. Sister Annie Laurie, if you don't know, was one of the sisters of St. Joseph who felt compelled to assist those who had contracted HIV and AIDS in the 1980s, and she approached her superior and wanted a house for a few nuns. She immersed herself with the local gay activist Andrew Whitbread Brown in the underbelly of King's Cross nightlife to understand the lives of young men who are contracting HIV. A Catholic property of McKillop House in Carrington was chosen, and after heated community debate, agreement in the community was achieved, and it was set up in 1989 as a place of rest and refuge for people with AIDS, men and women, straight and gay, often from the country, New South Wales, and their families visiting Newcastle up until about 2000. And there's this, that's okay. Then another ABC journalist approached me
to go over the yellow socks, so-called yellow socks affair in 1952 in Newcastle. They'd listened to Kevin Coleman's interview on our website, and they like to do a program based on that interview. The program in the end became a short interview with me, together with the oral history of Kevin and the context provided by Dr. Justin Ellis from the University of Newcastle. And in the interview, Kevin recounted the Blitz and specifically said it wasn't a yellow socks, wasn't called yellow socks in 1952. That's something we've got to remember. So we get to find out where the yellow socks came from. His boyfriend at the time was the local mercer, Keith Robinson in Hunter Street, who had been alluded to in the trials by the defence lawyer as the centre of the web of homosexual activity in Newcastle. So it was imperative that the Vice Squad get a confession from Kevin implicating Keith. And young Kevin, who was just a railway workshop apprentice, had faced down the Vice Squad detectives and gave no ground, unlike other men arrested who broke the Camp Wells strict code of silence. So he's a bit of a hero. And then the story was heard on Newcastle Catch Up and nationally on the ABC's news blog. And Kerry Bashford and I are going to meet with the new owners of a place called Bernie's Bar. They hadn't realised that Bernie's Bar, that our site had an interview with Jackie Ansell, who was the owner of the Bernie's Bar in the 1970s. So they've gone through that, and they want us to talk at a history evening at the new bar, which is located in the King Street, the King Street bar of the old Star Hotel. So that should be, we're going to meet with them next week. And I'll put up those links for Little Richard and the two ABC shows. So I think we've got some coverage for Hunter Living Histories in the national sphere. So
that's great.
I feel quite good about it. Thank you.
You're busy, John.
Yeah, it's good.
That's fabulous. And we've got some
footage. Oh no.
No, we've got a couple more. Dorothy Hewitt event.
They're just get posted on the Hunter Living Histories monthly blog page, but just to remind people that and I think Marilla's online, the event that they're organising for Dorothy Hewitt, the centenary celebration of the centenary, hosted by her sons, and it's at Springwood on Sunday the 21st of May at 2 p.m. So I have sent out in an email, and I think it's already embedded in the blog as well, about that event. And then the Loud Sky exhibition is still on at the lockup. One of our interns has 3D scanned the exhibition and curating it with Professor Kathleen McPhillips. That would be fantastic technology to use at Ms. Porter's house as well, to capture, because it's such a small house, be perfect for that. So we'll share that sometime in the future. And History Week, I've announced the theme for this year is Voices from the Past, and that's 2nd to the 10th of September.
Okay. Fabulous. Any updates that people want to quickly share? Yep, Leslie. Oh, that's right. We've had the fantastic Mini Friends Book Fair. And
I was just going to thank the Hunter Living Histories for the support for Charles Martin's exhibition, and also our part of the weekend. It was really, really wonderful.
I saw his memorial live streamed. Actually, it was very moving. His memorial last week, his funeral, was live streamed, and it was very moving, yes.
But the one that's up on Hunter Living History is that's good, very good one.
Yeah, it was a lovely evening. I got to, hopefully the VC is chiming in this afternoon because we had a chat, or more like an ear bashing at the event of both ends of the gallery. But one of them was about the role of working class people in the formation of the university. So there you go, Rod. I hope it's there, it's recorded, so we'll be able to listen to it at his pleasure. All the proceeds are going to scholarships, and it's running until when, Leslie?
Sorry?
Until,
Finished yesterday.
oh, it finished yesterday, okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
So it's
it
gone.
did.
But
Do you know how much money you raised?
Oh, about almost 7,000.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's not counting Charles Martin's.
no, and the
No,
Charles
that's
Martin
just from the
paintings,
other
all the staff
donated
knows,
items.
yes, they went to Vera Deakin Regional History Fund.
Yes, and I met the Vera Deakin scholarship person,
Yeah.
Isabel what?
Isabel Whittle.
Whittle. That's right. I met her too
Yeah.
at the Thursday event, so it was lovely.
Yeah, so that was today. They sung the People's Chorus, sang Weevils in the Flower, which is for Vera, written by Dorothy Hewitt.
And you've got the
commemorative
tribute to
issue.
Vera Deakin in the one up there with the submarine on the front.
Yes. All right, now to end this May Day meeting, thank you to all the presenters and the speakers and the wonderful news. We'd like to end with the recent May Day film that's been digitised by the Glamex team just went this morning. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us. We'll sign off with this historic film from 1947 in beautiful colour. And it just thought we are really blessed to have that team of people upstairs going through all our 16mm videotape footage and digitising it and bringing it to the wider community. I don't think there's any other community around Australia that's just better served than ours. Enjoy, and we'll see you next time on the 5th of June.
Yes.
And for the next showcase. But apart from that, thank you very much for your presence today.